What's up, everyone? My apologies for the long wait. As you all know, I've got tons of other projects I'll be working on this year. But I'm finally happy to announce that the New Year's Q&A is finally happening. So the format with how I'm going to do this is really simple. Because I got so many questions this time, and a lot were asked more than once, I decided to divide everyone's questions by number. This part will consist of those who asked 1 to 2 questions. Part 2 will be for those who asked 3, Part 3 for 4 questions, and Part 4 for 5. Also, if you ask the same kind of question, your name will be credited with whomever I'm responding to.
So, without further ado, let's get started.
So, to begin this Q&A, our first question comes from Daniel Tiger Thomas Fan 1225. Did Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood deserve any kind of continuation or spin-off? Well, that's a bit tricky, because as a newly developed fan of MRN, from what I've seen between YouTube videos or my own personal DVDs that I've bought, that's very hard to say. I think the original show was just fine, and maybe a spin-off wasn't all that necessary. From what I've seen, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, I believe, stripped the original show of its former glory. I know that show was for the next generation, but it is severely dumbed down from the original show. There's a very thin line with talking to and talking down to the audience when I look at the two. Mr. Rogers talked to the audience in a very calming manner so that the kids could understand what he was trying to tell them. Whereas Daniel Tiger is like every other generic children's show they try to throw out there. In a very weird way, it kind of reminds me of Dora. It's like they talk to the audience, but it's like, oh, do you see this? Do you see that? I feel like kids nowadays really need to get away from all the generic stuff and watch the shows from the 90s to early 2000s. That's when TV was at its peak. So with that said, maybe Mr. Rogers was better off as its own thing, with no continuation and no spin-off. Moving on to our second question. This comes from MickeyFan1909. What got you into Disney's Pinocchio? That's a really interesting story. So my nan was really big into Disney when I was younger, and she had this really huge collection of classic Disney tapes. And I remember that Pinocchio was one of the very first tapes I was ever introduced to. First time I saw it, I immediately fell in love with it. I loved the story, the music, I obviously loved Pinocchio, Jiminy Cricket, everything. However, there was a point in time when this, along with tons of other movies, were donated to a children's hospital, and I was unable to watch these for so many years. I don't remember what year it was, but I do know when the DVD finally came out, that I practically begged my mother to get me, no hesitation, I put it directly on. Now let me tell you this. Back in the day, I never got emotional with Disney films, but somehow as an adult, there are some scenes that really have a way of moving you. Like, for example, the short quote-unquote death before Pinocchio turns into a real boy, or say the reprise of When You Wish Upon a Star. For some reason, these two particular scenes always choke me up. Why? I don't know. I really can't explain it. Now, this is just a side note thing that I'm not going to go too much into detail with, because this is technically not a Disney film. There was one other version of Pinocchio that I did grow up with, but it wasn't very well liked. I don't really think a lot of people know of this movie's existence, which I guess is kind of a good thing, because even though it's nostalgic to me, it's a bad nostalgia. I will say though, if anyone wanted to check this movie out for themselves, be my guest, but watch at your own risk, because it's a very strange version. And I feel like I should quickly add this in as well. As far as how I feel about the 2022 remake, I think it's actually pretty good. Not as good as the original, but I thought it was fine. I really don't get the over-exaggerated hate for it. I think some of the more critical reviews are coming from people who are most likely expecting a copy-paste of the original 1940 movie, and maybe with a few tweaks, but that's not what a remake is, folks. Like I said, I don't think it surpasses the original, far from it, but I do think it's one of the better Disney remakes we've gotten. But going back to the classic Pinocchio, as I said earlier, I have my Nan to thank for that, because had she not had any of those tapes, I don't know when I would have ever watched that in my life. So I thank her wholeheartedly for introducing me to one of the best classic Disney movies. Alright, our third question comes from Stewart Studios 5. How would you rewrite Misty Island Rescue? Well, I already don't like Misty Island to begin with, so I wouldn't even know where to begin with this trash heap. If you're gonna have a search and rescue center, actually have it in the plot. Don't make it half-built like they did in Calling All Engines, but make it nearly finished. If you wanted the Diesel-Thomas plotline mixed in here, have Thomas not make a racist comment to Diesel about being really useful, but instead have Diesel wanting to help but doesn't ask if it's okay to. Say he takes the remaining materials, Thomas chases him, Diesel loses them, Thomas saves him. Then, why not a few days later they finish the center, and for his bravery, that's when Thomas gets this huge reward, but he also gets this massive head about Diesel in general. Hey, we're already sounding like a better movie. Say then they send him somewhere other than the mainland, and it's a completely different place. Could be anywhere you want it to, it doesn't really matter. He does get lost at sea, and ends up on a very misty island, with no other characters, because fuck the logging locos. Word gets back, oh no, Thomas is missing, but how convenient, we have a search and rescue center now. Send a team to actually go and look for him. Have Captain in the water, Harold in the air, while Thomas is stuck alone on this mysterious island. Now, let's put in that they've searched nearly every corner of land out at sea and still can't find Thomas until the last place they check is this misty island. If you wanted smoke signals to play a part, then let's say Thomas sends up a smoke signal, Harold sees it, word gets back to Sodor, and they need a way to rescue Thomas. Now how about if Diesel offers to go by ship to the island, led by Harold, he arrives to save Thomas, and Thomas is humble with how he originally thought about Diesel. Everyone's even Steven, back to Sodor they go. Now doesn't that sound like a much better story compared to the junk heap we have? This is exactly how I picture the new Misty Island Rescue to be. No stupidly written characters, no racist comments, actually having things within the plotline play throughout the story, no logging locos, and no rhyming. Then you got yourself a successful Thomas movie, my friends. And the next question comes from Interstate 2011. Will there be an episode redub of Theodore Tugboat anytime soon? As much as I want to say yes to that, I don't think I'll be doing any more Theodore redubs, which kinda sucks, cause I had fun doing my Bad Dreams one. I'll admit it was kind of a hassle to try and put it all together, and ever since I cancelled my Thomas redubs, the spark for them just isn't there anymore. Not gonna lie, but redubs nowadays are kinda cringe, mainly because some voice actors, who mind my saying, really can't voice act. It was fun when only a few people were doing them, and then everyone just kind of jumped on that bandwagon, and it just became repetitive between episodes, and those constant people that were asking for roles, etc. And not for nothing, but Thomas instrumentals are slightly easier to make than the Theodore ones, and trying to do so with mainly the English dubs is a very lengthy process. So yeah, with all that in mind, I'm not going to be doing any more redubs. And the next question comes from Bradley17 Productions. What is your favorite episode of Blue's Clues? Oh boy, that's a hard one. Because technically, I haven't seen every episode of Blue's Clues. And I also don't want to be biased and say a common one that a lot of people mentioned, like Blue's Birthday, Big Pajama Party, Treasure Hunt, ones like that. And I also don't remember every title each episode has. I could tell you what happens in certain ones that I remember, but that's really it. I might have to get back to you on that one. One of these days, though, I do need to sit and watch it properly again. And our next question is from Matthew C. If you could, how would you bring the classic Thomas and Friends series that was filmed with the models? I really don't know, to be honest with you. That's something I never really gave deep thought about. I don't know, I feel like in this day and age, it might be a little difficult, because you gotta remember, running models like that was expensive, and to bring them back in the series, that's another difficult task. This could just be me, but it seems like so many people have gotten used to the cartoony Thomas, younger kids in particular. To whip the models back out, that would raise a lot of confusion to them, I think. Yeah, I don't really have a proper answer for that. Sorry. Okay, next question from Raging Scrat. Have you seen or read The Bad Guys? I unfortunately do not know what that is, so I can't answer that. Sorry. Next question from Fan of Everything. Have you seen the I'm banishing you to the Shadow Realm memes? Well, of course. I mean, they're practically everywhere on YouTube, for God's sake.
I'm banishing you to the Shadow Realm. No! Much better.
Next question from Alex the LMS Ginty. What are your thoughts on Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure? Okay, well, I don't want to go too deep into detail with this question, so as not to ruin my thoughts for when I rank all the movies. So to keep it very basic, this is what I think of Lost Treasure.
It's freaking awesome.
Alright, next question from Nick Schweller. I hope I got that right. What do you think of Sonic Said AM? Funny you bring that up, because I just finished doing a binge of Sad AM off of YouTube recently. If I have to be brutally honest, though, I enjoyed some of the episodes, but how they were categorized in terms of episode order sucked. This show cannot keep a consistent storyline to save its life. I was really irritated when we jumped from one plot to the next. We could be on the topic of Sally finding clues about her father, and then we're on a plot line with Sonic's Uncle Chuck. The bouncing around is really hard to follow. I do know that some of the questions I had do get answered later on in Season 2, but they could have done a better job with what plotline to stick with first. And the way some of those characters are introduced is a bit confusing. Like, some of them just show up out of nowhere, like I'm supposed to know already who the hell they are. You know, characters like Bunny, Dulcie, Rotor, they just show up. I'm not even that fond of the way Tails is introduced. I think the Adventures of Sonic did it much better. And in terms of other characters, I can't stand Antoine. Almost every episode he was in, and he either said or did anything stupid, I was instantly annoyed. I just don't like him. Not for nothing, the way Season 2 ended off, I was kinda disappointed knowing that there's no Season 3. Yeah, this show really wasn't as good as I thought it was gonna be. I personally would not recommend it. And the next question from Random Videos Gaming. Why do you like Thomas so much? I guess it's just because it was one of the better shows from my childhood that I really loved. Not just me, but a ton of fans. Thomas has a way of allowing us to escape from reality, where we can feel like we're kids again, in a sense. This more or less is present with those who grew up with the classic series. That's where the pure magic of Thomas really sets in on a deep level. What we have today in terms of Thomas is nothing compared to what originally was. The classic series, and even a small hint of the hit era, let us go back to our roots. And you gotta remember, the series did give us some pretty relatable stories and characters, which is another thing that makes Thomas so magical to fans. And that is why we all love it so much. Next question from Braze Finds. What are the bottom 5 Theodore Tugboat episodes? As in, worst episodes. Well, if you saw my recent update video for 2023, that will be one of the videos I tackle for Theodore this year. I try to give you a list now, but then I'm going to be babbling on for hours, and I do need to think long and hard about these bottom episodes, so be on the lookout when I'm ready to work on that video. Okay, here's one of 2 questions from Edward9909. What are your thoughts on The Lion Guard? Truth be told, it's one of only a small few of the Disney Junior shows that I actually like. It's interesting how they turned this into a pre-sequel kind of series following the events of the original Lion King and Simba's Pride. There are a few things that happen that kind of have me scratching my head a bit, but they're nothing too overly drastic. I won't say what happens due to spoilers for those who may haven't watched this. If you haven't, though, I'd recommend giving it a watch. For a children's show in this day and age, it's pretty freaking good. And their second question is, if you got the rights to Thomas, what would you do with the series? I actually never properly thought about that either. But I guess if I did, I'd want to do what I think everybody wants. Adapt more of the Railway series stories. More so, the Culdee Fell stories. Yes, I know there's more, like Doubleheader, I think it's called. Don't quote me on that. I haven't read every single story. I don't remember most of the titles, forgive me. You could adapt those, but I'd be very interested in the Culdee Fell engines first, if I had the rights. Okay, here's our next question from Caleb Tucker. What is your favorite part about summer? Easy. My birthday. It's the only other time I really get to be with my family and friends, which is why I kind of like weekend birthdays, because you can do so much more compared to the other weekdays. I tend to do this quite often. I spoil myself rotten buying whatever the hell I like off of eBay, Amazon, whatever. But there's also a little philosophy that I like to live by. I may look older, but mentally, I'm not. I can definitely act mature when it's necessary, but I'm always going to be that young kid at heart. It's who I am, and that's who I want to be. And their second question is, do you like stuffed crust pizza? Can't say yes, and I can't say no to that. Just haven't had that opportunity to try it. Next question from Zach Wright. Have you watched CBBC's Raven or Trapped? I do not know what any of those are, so that's another I'm afraid I cannot answer. And their next question, what's your favorite Michael Angelis dubbed Thomas season? Probably season 4 on par with George. I get a very similar comfort feeling whenever I listen to either Angelis or Carlin in this particular season. The way that both of them do it, actually, it's kind of soothing. That's just about the best way I can describe it, really. Moving on with the first question from CC Studios. When did you get into MLP Friendship is Magic? I want to say it was either 2013 or 14 when I first got into it. I'm very foggy on that, but how I got into it was through an ex-friend. They were telling me all about it, and at the time, I just didn't see the appeal until I was really bored one summer, and I decided maybe I wanted to give this a chance. You know, just to see what all the hype was about. So on Discovery Family, they were doing weekly season marathons, and I started off with parts 1 and 2 of the Cutie Map. And after that, I started taking an interest. So I went back by myself, and I watched everything from season 1 until I was all the way caught up, right up until the series ended. And truth be told, it's a pretty good series. Now, let me just say this last thing. I'm not a crazed fan of the show. I do not fangirl over it. That's more of like a closet interest for me. It's actually been a long while since I've watched anything Friendship is Magic related, because I've been so focused on other shows. But yeah, short and simple, that's how I got into MLP. And their next question is, if you ever felt like doing a remake of a Thomas film or episode, what would it be? Well, I already rewrote one story based off of Skarloey Storms Through to make it sound more of like a classic series story, which I'm still pretty proud of how that turned out. But I'm not gonna choose just one episode or a movie to remake, because there's too many to name that you could totally redo. Episode-wise, I definitely fix the narrow gauge stories. Ones like Wharf and Peace, Rheneas and the Dinosaur, A Smooth Ride, Skarloey the Brave. All great examples on what could be written so much better. Movie-wise, you've got, Magic Railroad, Calling All Engines, Misty Island, Big World Big Adventures. These 100% could be better. These again are prime examples that I would definitely fix first, but generally speaking, there's a lot that really should be remade into much better stories. And here's the next of 2 questions by Samuel Warwick. Have you heard of Jim Henson's Animal Jam? Yes, I have, actually. The only way I know about it, though, is through some trailers on some of the Thomas DVDs I own. While it may look cool to some, it's just another one of those shows that doesn't really interest me all that much, so I don't think I'll be checking it out anytime soon. And their next question, if you had to pick a favorite season from the hit era, what would it be? Hands down, Season 8. It's the best season out of that particular era. Most of the stories in that are pretty solid for the most part, with a few mediocre ones at times. Whereas, say, Season 11, for me personally, comes second with half good, half bad episodes. And then there's Seasons 9 and 10 that, well, they just exist. Whether you like it or not, Season 8 is definitely better than the rest. Next question from Hank the Funniest Tugboat. What's your favorite album from The Wiggles? I have quite a few, but the one that stands out to me is Wiggle Bay. I think this album is pretty much as perfect as you can get. There's not one song off this album that I don't like. They're unique, catchy, and most of those songs are some of my favorites that they've done. This album is just fantastic. And their next question, are you going to be continuing your Tugs Thomas parody videos? I'm really not sure. To be honest, I actually forgot about that parody series, along with my Theodore ones. The thing with those is, you'd have to be fully stocked with all the model episodes for Thomas, so you're basically all set to go. When my old computer crashed, I couldn't get any of that back. I was using free downloader apps for a while until they all stopped working. So the only way for me to get clips now, which is how I do most of my work anyway, is through screen recording. But that also eats up my memory on my iPad, so the clips would have to be really, really super short, and then there's the cropping, and it would just be a very lengthy process. A hell of a lengthy process compared to what I was working with before. So even though those were kind of fun to make back in the day, yeah, I'm sorry, but it doesn't look like I'll be working on those anytime soon. And here's our next question from Engine Boy 53 Productions. What's your opinion on MLP G5? It's okay, I guess. I haven't really bothered to sit and watch anything from G5, to be honest with you. The pony renders in particular are fine, but they totally look like something I'd see from one of those old Barbie movies. For the most part, I just stick with G4. That was my intro to MLP, and that's really all I want to stick with. And their second question, if there was a Thomas the Tank Engine model or prop from the model series you wish to own, which one would it be? If I was to own any model or prop, I'm not choosing just one. Some of the props are cool for the most part, but I have more of an interest in the models, and I would specifically want Thomas, Henry, James, Percy, Toby, Donald, Douglas, Skarloey, Rheneas, Bill, Ben, and Mavis. Next one of two questions from Eric Burns. Who is your favorite illustrator of the Railway series? Can't really give you an answer to that one because I don't remember all of their names. That was just a small detail that I never really paid attention to that much. And I also would not want to base it off of bias, so yeah, do not have an answer for that one. And their next question, what is your favorite season of Theodore Tugboat? Oh, that's easy. Season 3. No, it's not just because my favorite episode just so happens to be in this season, but this is where I feel like Theodore reached its peak. The stories were very much amped up, visually it took some risks, and they really paid off, and the overall messages they were trying to get across got more deep as it progressed. So that's why I love this particular season. Overall, it's a ton of fun, and the season as a whole is really exciting. Up next is our first question from Norris Dead. What would you consider Classic Thomas? Alright, well, I know most people would consider Season 7 the start of the hit era, but for me, that's not the case here. Classic Thomas to me is Seasons 1 to 7. They all share the same 4.5-minute format, and they've got the intermissions with the name boards. Don't care about new intros or outros, don't really care that they were shown during the hit era. That to me is still Classic Thomas. And on that note, Norris's next question, do you prefer Season 6 or 7 of Thomas? This may or may not shock a bunch of you, but I actually prefer Season 6 to 7. Season 6 in my eyes is really overlooked and overhated. You do have a lot of hidden gems in this season that hardly anybody talks about. The only reason why 6 is so frowned upon is because of Baldwin's narration. And anyone who knows me by this point knows I'm not that critical. I judge mainly how a story is written, not how it's told. And it says quite a lot when I like a hell of a lot more episodes in 6 than I do 7. I like a few, but not a lot. Season 7 is what I call sleepy boring. It does not interest me that much like the other seasons do. And this is why I like 6 over 7. And here is our first question from the Thomas and Tugs man. Have you ever seen Bluey? I've heard of it, but I've never actually watched it. It's, again, one of those shows that I was never really focused on. So, can't give you an opinion on it. And their other question, are you looking forward to Cars Retold? Honestly, I haven't really been paying too much attention to that. A lot of fan content I don't really bat an eye over nowadays, which is funny because I was offered to join the cast, but I immediately turned it down. It's not that I wouldn't want to, because I will admit there are times when I do miss voice acting, but that's a chapter of my life that's pretty much all said and done. The only time I ever do that is for really close friends or for my own projects, which really isn't that often. And also because I don't think I can be fully committed to do something as big as that, knowing that I have my own work to do for my own channel, which is why I need to really pick up the pace. But for those of you who are involved with this project, I wish you all the best of luck, and I hope you all have fun with that. Alright, here's our next question from Sadvik Wiggle. What songs do you like by Avril Lavigne? Well, actually, I don't listen to a lot of her music in particular, so I really don't know a lot of her songs. And there's only one that I do know. I think everybody knows this song, though. Girlfriend. It's the only song of hers that I do remember listening to all those years ago. And their next question, are you a lazy or active person? Well, I'd like to say that I'm active, but I'm really not. I'm more of a lazy, laid-back kind of person. Just taking things easy, especially since COVID happened. I'd like to be a little more active, but there's really nothing to do where I live. And I don't really have anyone to do things with, which really doesn't say that much either. I have gotten a little too used to it, and that's not good. That's a habit, though, that I will break sooner or later. When? I don't know, but one day I will. Alright, and here's one of our last two questions from Mr. Stanley and Zatanna. Name your top 5 favorite Thomas specials, not counting redubs you've been a part of. That's yet another tough one to answer. I've only been in a very short number of Thomas projects. One that definitely comes to mind is Shining Time Greetings, when yours truly voiced James. I was in another Christmas-related one, but I don't remember too much about that particular project. And the only other one I can think of was this story done by Rosie the Cutie 1995, this one called Little Philip Lost, where I voiced Lexi. Can't really think of any more, to be honest, so I can't really make a top 5 out of just them. And on top of your last question, name your top 5 favorite creators you've collaborated with, the thing with that is, I can't really pick just 5, because every creator that I've worked with was a lot of fun. And this might be just me, but personally, I don't really like ranking creators based on what Thomas projects they do. Whether it's episode recreations, reviews, your own stories, even redubs. Because at the end of the day, we all do the same kind of stuff with Thomas. And how you rank creators based on that can go in so many different ways. You could rank them by bias, which is something that I never want to do. And I also feel like when you rank certain people higher than others, that can give some a bit of an ego boost. And that can turn really nasty, which I have seen personally happen. Also, I can't imagine how disheartening it may feel to some others who I either wouldn't or don't pick or rank higher, because to them it's like, well, what are these guys doing differently than me? Do you see where I'm kind of getting at? That's why with this particular ranking system, I stay well away from it. I just can't bring myself to rank one Thomas creator over the next.